My name is Gabriella, and for the longest time, I thought the worst day of my life was when my own parents told me that my daughter wasn't a real grandchild. They built their world on the idea of bloodlines, of legacy, and when my husband and I adopted our little girl, they told me our branch of the family tree had withered and died. They used that cruel logic to try and cut us out of my grandfather's will, but they never could have imagined the secret he left me. It was a secret hidden in a small locked box, a truth that would let me sit in a cold, quiet lawyer's office and listen to their entire hateful argument before I finally revealed that their claim to our family legacy was just as fraudulent as their love. Before I dive into how a single piece of paper from 1934 shattered my family's self-righteous world, I'd love to know where you all are watching from today. Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe that family is about who you love, not where you come from, please hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new viewers here, make sure you subscribe, because this community is built on stories of strength and finding your own way. And I am so grateful to be able to share mine with you all. It all started with a simple, powerful desire to be a mother, a desire that my own mother would eventually use as a weapon against me. The irony was, the one person who understood, the one who saw my daughter for the miracle she was, had been hiding a secret so similar to my own that it would ultimately become my salvation. But at the beginning, all I felt was the sting of rejection, a coldness that settled deep in my bones and threatened to stay there forever. Growing up, my world was defined by a quiet, unspoken comparison. I was Gabriella, the steady, thoughtful one. My sister, Clarissa, was the vibrant one, the one who seemed to reflect the sun in a way I never could. She had our mother's easy laugh and our father's confident stride. I had a sketchbook full of charcoal drawings and a tendency to observe from the corner of the room. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, never used words like favorite, but they didn't have to. Favoritism isn't spoken, it's lived. It's in the extra scoop of ice cream for Clarissa after a soccer game she won, while I was just asked to clear the table. It was in the way their eyes would light up when Clarissa announced she was running for class president, while my winning a regional art competition was met with a distracted, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Don't get paint on the carpet." It was 1,000 tiny paper cuts, each one small and seemingly insignificant, but they accumulated over years, leaving a network of fine, white scars on my spirit. My father, Richard, was a man obsessed with appearances and lineage. He was a partner at a mid-level accounting firm, but he spoke of our family as if we were landed gentry. He had a framed, stylized family tree in his study, a monstrosity of calligraphy and gold leaf that traced our lineage back to some supposed second cousin of a minor baronet in the 18th century. It was his pride and joy. "This is who we are, girls," he'd say, tapping the glass. "This is history. This is continuity. It's your responsibility to honor it." Clarissa, who excelled at everything she tried, seemed to embody that continuity. I, with my ink-stained fingers and preference for books over social events, was a confusing, slightly disappointing offshoot. The one sanctuary in that carefully curated world was my grandfather's house. Granddad Arthur was my father's father, but he was a man cut from a different cloth entirely. While my father saw the world in terms of assets and bloodlines, Granddad Arthur saw it in terms of stories and kindness. He was a retired carpenter, his hands gnarled and calloused, but they were the gentlest hands I had ever known. His workshop smelled of sawdust and lemon oil, a scent that to this day feels more like home than my own childhood house ever did. He never cared that I was quiet. He would sit with me for hours in comfortable silence while I sketched, occasionally murmuring, "You've got a good eye, Gabby. You see the things other people walk right past." He was the one who bought me my first professional set of artist's pencils, a beautiful wooden box of them that I treasured more than any piece of jewelry. He didn't understand my art in any technical sense, but he understood the passion behind it. He understood me. He never spoke much about his own past, only offering vague snippets about growing up during the Depression, how times were hard, and how his parents had sacrificed a lot for him. I always pictured a small, grim-faced family struggling together, bound by hardship and blood. He was the bedrock of our family, the quiet patriarch whose presence commanded a level of respect even my father couldn't entirely dismiss. Though Richard often treated his father's gentle nature as a form of weakness, a quaint relic of a bygone era. For me, Granddad Arthur was the only person who made me feel that I was enough, exactly as I was. My husband, Mark, was another safe harbor. We met in college, and he was the first person who didn't seem to compare me to anyone. He loved my quiet nature, my artistic soul. He called my observational tendencies a superpower. When we decided to start a family, we were filled with a hopeful, almost naive optimism. But that optimism slowly eroded with each passing month, then each passing year. The journey of infertility is a lonely, silent heartbreak. It's a landscape of clinical waiting rooms, hushed, sympathetic voices from nurses, and the gut-wrenching cycle of hope and despair. Each negative test was a small death. Each baby announcement from a friend or colleague felt like a personal blow, a reminder of our own painful emptiness. Clarissa, of course, had no such troubles. She announced her first pregnancy a year into our struggle, and my parents were ecstatic. The family tree in my father's study would get a new, golden-lettered entry. While I was injecting myself with hormones that made my body feel alien and my emotions ragged, my mother was planning a baby shower for Clarissa that was less a party and more a coronation. Through it all, Mark was my rock. He held me through the tears, celebrated the small victories of a promising test result, and mourned the inevitable crashes. After 3 years and 2 devastating miscarriages, we sat in our living room, surrounded by the ghosts of what might have been, and we made a decision. It wasn't a second choice or a consolation prize. It was a conscious, deliberate turn toward a different kind of hope. We decided to adopt. The moment we made that choice, a weight I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying began to lift. The focus shifted from what our bodies couldn't do to what our hearts could. The adoption process was its own mountain to climb, paperwork, interviews, home studies, but it was a hopeful labor. We weren't trying to force a biological connection. We were building a nest, waiting for the child who was meant for us. A year later, we got the call. A baby girl, just 3 days old. Her name was Lily. The drive to the agency was a blur of nervous energy and pure, unadulterated joy. And then, a social worker placed a tiny, swaddled bundle in my arms. I looked down at her perfect, sleeping face, her little rosebud mouth, the tuft of dark hair on her head. The world just stopped. All the years of pain, the needles, the disappointment, it all dissolved in that one sacred moment. She was mine. She was ours. This tiny, perfect human was my daughter. I felt a love so fierce and absolute it took my breath away. It was a love that didn't care about genetics or biology. It was primal, profound, and utterly complete. Mark leaned over, his eyes shining with tears, and placed his hand over mine, on Lily's small, warm body. "Hello, Lily," he whispered. "We've been waiting for you for so long." In that moment, we weren't a couple who couldn't conceive. We were a family. Announcing it to my parents was a moment I had perhaps foolishly, looked forward to. I imagined they would see the radiant happiness on our faces, feel the love we had for this child, and share in our joy. I was wrong. We invited them over for dinner, our little Lily sleeping soundly in her bassinet in the corner of the living room. I took a deep breath and said, "Mom, Dad, we have some wonderful news. We've adopted a daughter. Her name is Lily." My mother's smile froze on her face, a brittle, polite mask. My father cleared his throat and looked away toward the fireplace. "Oh," my mother finally said, the word hanging in the air like a puff of cold smoke. "That's nice, dear. A bit sudden, wasn't it? Sudden, after 4 years of relentless heartbreaking struggle?" Mark, sensing my shock, stepped in. "We're just so happy. She's amazing." He gestured toward the bassinet. My father glanced over, a brief, dismissive look. "Right. Well, congratulations, I suppose." The conversation quickly moved on. No questions about Lily, no request to hold her. Just a stilted, awkward pivot to talking about Clarissa's pregnancy. A week later, Clarissa had her baby shower. It was an opulent affair at a country club, with a guest list of over 100 people. My mother had been planning it for months. The gifts were extravagant, the decorations worthy of a magazine spread. Mark and I attended, feeling like ghosts at the feast. People would coo over Clarissa's perfect baby bump while offering us a tight, pitying smile. "We heard your news," they'd say. "How charitable of you." It was as if we'd undertaken a community service project, not created a family. The token gift for Lily arrived 2 weeks later, delivered by a courier. It was a generic store-bought blanket, the kind you'd buy for a colleague's new baby. There was no card from them, just the gift receipt tucked inside. The message was clear, colder and sharper than any words they could have spoken. Clarissa's child was a celebration. My child was an afterthought. That first rejection was just the opening chapter in a long and painful book of exclusion. As Lily grew from a baby into a bright, giggling toddler, the disparity became a constant, throbbing ache in our lives. The first Christmas after Lily joined our family and Clarissa's son, Leo, was born, set the precedent for all the years to come. We all gathered at my parents' house, a place that was supposed to feel warm and festive, but instead felt like a stage for my family's hierarchy. Under the glittering Christmas tree, there was a mountain of presents for Leo. A rocking horse, designer baby clothes, a wagon filled with educational toys. For Lily, there was a single, brightly wrapped box. Inside was a soft toy, a generic pink bear, the kind you could find at any drugstore. Lily was too young to notice, of course, but I noticed. Mark noticed. The most cutting moment came when my father gathered everyone for the annual family photo. "Everyone in," he called out, positioning Clarissa and her husband with baby Leo right next to him and my mother. He raised the camera. I stood off to the side, holding Lily, waiting to be called. He didn't call. He was about to take the picture when Granddad Arthur, who was standing on the other side of my father, said gruffly, "Richard, you're missing someone." My father looked around, feigning confusion. "Who?" "You're missing your other granddaughter," Arthur said, his voice low and firm, nodding his head towards me. My mother waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, for goodness sake, Arthur, don't be so dramatic. Squeeze in here, Gabriella." She didn't look at me, her voice laced with irritation, as if I were the one causing a problem. I shuffled into the frame, my face burning with humiliation, holding my daughter close. In the final photograph, I'm on the very edge, half in shadow, my smile a tight, painful grimace. The pattern became cruelly predictable. For Leo's first birthday, and then his sister Chloe's 2 years later, my parents would throw lavish parties, bouncy castles, catered food, professional entertainers, They were grand declarations of love and status. For Lily's birthdays, they were always coincidentally busy. "Oh, is that this weekend?" my mother would say when I called to invite them. "What a shame your father and I have a commitment with the golf club. We just can't get out of it. We'll pop a card in the mail." The card would arrive a week late with a crisp $20 bill tucked inside, a gesture so impersonal it was more insulting than forgetting altogether. They never called her their granddaughter. It was always your daughter or little Lily. They were polite, distant observers of her life, not active, loving participants. The casual cruelty was relentless. My mother would call me, bubbling with excitement about a precious thing Leo said, or how Chloe had Granddad Richard's eyes. She would then, without pausing for breath, ask me about my work or the weather, never about Lily. It was a deliberate, continuous erasure of my child's place in the family. Mark saw the toll it was taking on me. He was furious on my behalf, his protective instincts warring with his desire not to create an irreparable rift. "This isn't right, Gabby," he'd say, his jaw tight with anger after another particularly blatant snub. "They're punishing you. And for what? For building a family full of love?" I had no answer. I would just try to plaster on a brave face, to absorb the hurt so it wouldn't touch Lily. But it was seeping in, poisoning the joy I should have been feeling. The final, clarifying blow came during a quiet afternoon visit. I had gone to my parents' house alone, hoping that without the children present, I could have a real conversation with my mother, that I could somehow bridge the chasm that had opened between us. We sat in the formal living room, the one with the pristine white couches that no one ever actually sat on. I tried to explain how much their distance hurt, how Lily deserved to know her grandparents. My mother, Eleanor, listened with a patient, condescending expression. Then she set her teacup down with a soft click. "Gabriella, you have to understand," she began, her voice dripping with a kind of patronizing pity. "It's not that we don't care for the child. It's about legacy. It's about our family's history, the bloodline continuing. That's what family is." My blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "that Clarissa is continuing the line. Her children are a part of that, a direct link to our past and our future. Your branch, well, it's a lovely sentiment, Gabriella, what you've done. It's a very noble thing, but it's different. You have to accept that. It's just not the same." My father walked in at that moment, having overheard the last part. He nodded in firm agreement. "Your mother is right," he said, his voice full of the self-important gravity he reserved for what he considered profound truths. "It's about carrying on the family name, the heritage. It's simple biology. Some things can't be manufactured, Gabriella. They just are." They were a united front, their logic a cold, impenetrable wall. They had taken my greatest joy and twisted it into a failure, a genetic dead end. I left their house that day with a piece of my heart frozen solid. Throughout all of this, Granddad Arthur was my quiet, steadfast ally. He was the only one who never faltered. From the moment he first held Lily, his love for her was as pure and unconditional as his love for me had always been. He didn't see genetics. He saw a beautiful little girl who was his great-granddaughter. Full stop. He would come over to our house with little hand-carved wooden animals he'd made for her in his workshop. He'd get down on the floor with her, his old knees creaking, and let her tug on his magnificent white beard. He called her my little starling. He never made a grand show of it, but his actions were a constant, gentle rebuke of my parents' behavior. I would sometimes overhear him speaking to my father on the phone, his voice low but unyielding. "She is family, Richard. She is your granddaughter. That is the end of it." My father would offer some blustering response about tradition or reality, and my mother would dismiss Arthur's stance as the sentimentality of an old man who didn't understand the bigger picture. They treated his profound, simple love as a quaint eccentricity, like his fondness for tweed jackets or his habit of doing the daily crossword in pen. They had no idea that his quiet, unwavering love was the only thing holding the frayed edges of our family together. And they certainly had no idea that the very foundation of the bloodline they worshipped was something my grandfather understood in a way they never, ever could. His love for Lily wasn't just kindness. It was a deeply personal, fiercely held conviction born from a secret he had carried his entire life. The years passed, and the dynamic my parents had established became the new, painful normal. We saw them at obligatory holidays where the preferential treatment of Clarissa's children over Lily was always on stark display. I learned to build a wall around my heart, to shield myself, and more importantly, to shield Lily from the chilling indifference. Lily was a bright, perceptive child, and by the time she was 6 or 7, she started to notice. "Mommy," she asked me once after a tense Easter lunch, "why doesn't Grandma Eleanor ever want to see my drawings? She always puts Chloe's on the fridge." I hugged her tight, my throat thick with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "Grandma is just very busy, sweetie. It's not about you. Your drawings are beautiful." I was already teaching my child to make excuses for the people who should have loved her most. The thought was nauseating. Our lives became a series of concentric circles. At the very center were Mark, Lily, and me, our little fortress of unconditional love. The next circle held our chosen family, friends who adored Lily and were the aunts and uncles she deserved. And in the distant, cold outer orbit were my parents, and to a lesser extent, my sister, who seemed content to benefit from the unjust system without ever questioning it. Then, Granddad Arthur's health began to fail. It started slowly, a persistent cough and a growing weariness, and then it accelerated into a steep, heartbreaking decline. He was diagnosed with congestive heart failure, and the vibrant, steady man who had been my rock began to fade. My father and mother reacted to his illness with a sort of frantic, administrative grief. They were consumed with logistics, talking to doctors about prognoses, organizing his financial papers, discussing the future of his house. They spoke of his impending death in hushed, practical tones, as if it were a complex merger they needed to manage. Clarissa was stressed and overwhelmed, juggling her own children and the emotional weight of seeing her grandfather so frail. It was Mark and I who ended up spending the most time at his bedside. I would read to him from his favorite books of poetry, my voice steady even as my heart was breaking. Mark would talk to him about sports, fixing a loose doorknob in his room, providing a sense of normalcy in the sterile, quiet atmosphere of the nursing home. Lily would draw him pictures, vibrant explosions of color filled with suns and flowers and stick figures holding hands. He would tape each one to the wall by his bed, creating a chaotic, beautiful gallery. His nurses told me that even on his bad days, when he was confused or distant, he would sometimes just stare at those drawings and smile. One Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting with him alone. The room was quiet, filled with the rhythmic hiss and beep of the machines that were keeping him tethered to the world. He had been sleeping most of the day, his breathing shallow. Suddenly, his eyes opened, and for the first time in weeks, they were completely clear. He looked right at me, a flicker of his old, sharp intelligence returning. "Gabby," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle. I leaned in close, taking his cool, papery hand in mine. "I'm here, Granddad." He drew a slow, ragged breath. "There's a box," he said, the words costing him a visible effort. In my old writing desk, the big one in the study. I nodded, not wanting to interrupt. The key. It's in the lining of my tweed jacket, the green one, always my favorite. He paused, gathering his strength. It's for you, Gabby, only you. His grip on my hand tightened, surprisingly strong. His eyes held mine, and they were filled with a profound, urgent meaning that I couldn't decipher. Promise me, you'll understand. A tear slid from the corner of his eye and traced a path through the weathered lines on his face. I promise, Granddad, I whispered, my own tears starting to fall. I promise. He gave my hand one last, faint squeeze, and then his eyes drifted shut again, his energy spent. The moment of clarity had passed. He passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 days later. The funeral was a somber, tense affair. My father gave a eulogy that was more about his own identity as Arthur's son than it was about my grandfather's actual life. He spoke of legacy, of a strong chain passed from father to son, of the duty to carry on the family name. It was a performance, and it made my stomach churn. After the service, back at my parents' house, the mask of grief quickly slipped to reveal the familiar, grasping anxiety about inheritance. Surrounded by wilting funeral wreaths and plates of untouched food, my parents were already strategizing. I've spoken with Mr. Peterson, my father announced to the small gathering of close family. He'll be holding a formal reading of the will next week. It's important we're all there to ensure everything is handled according to Dad's wishes. He then looked pointedly at me, his expression a mixture of authority and warning. I trust Granddad was clear in his final instructions. He understood the importance of preserving the family line for the generations to come. My mother nodded in solemn agreement. He was a traditional man at heart. He knew where his responsibilities lay. They were talking about him as if he were an extension of their own warped ideology, completely ignoring the man who had cherished my adopted daughter. They were already preparing the battlefield, drawing their lines in the sand, and I knew, with a sinking certainty, that they were about to make their final, most decisive move to exclude us. A few days before the meeting with the lawyer, I felt a pull to go to my grandfather's house one last time before my parents had it cleared out and put up for sale. I wanted to walk through the rooms, to breathe in the scent of sawdust and old books, to gather a few small things that held his memory for me and for Lily. Mark came with me, and we moved through the quiet, sun-dusted house in a state of shared reverence. I went into his study, a room I had loved since childhood. There, against the far wall, was the old roll-top writing desk he had spoken of. It was a beautiful piece of furniture, dark oak, full of secret compartments and tiny drawers. My hands trembled slightly as I went to the closet where his old jackets hung. I found the green tweed one, its familiar nubby texture a comfort under my fingers. I felt along the inside of the silk lining, just as he'd said, and my fingers closed around a small, cold piece of metal. A key. It was old and ornate, with a simple, solid feel. I walked back to the desk, my heart pounding in my chest. I slid the key into the lock of a small, integrated strongbox set deep within the desk's structure. It turned with a satisfying, heavy click. I pulled open the small steel-plated door, and inside sat a small dark wooden box, no bigger than a book. It was heavy, made of mahogany, and it was also locked with its own smaller keyhole, but the key from the desk's strongbox fit this lock too. I took a deep breath, placed the box on the dusty surface of the desk, and turned the key. The lid lifted with a soft sigh. The air that escaped smelled of old paper and time itself. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, were just two things: a sheaf of folded, yellowed papers and a thick, sealed envelope with my name, Gabriella, written on the front in my grandfather's familiar, elegant script. My hands were shaking as I carefully picked up the brittle documents. I unfolded the first one. It was an official-looking certificate, filled with faded, typewritten letters and flourishing ink signatures. It was a birth certificate, dated 1934. But the name at the top wasn't Arthur Miller, my grandfather's name. It was infant boy Doe. The space for the mother's name was listed as unknown. The father's was blank. My brow furrowed in confusion. I picked up the second set of papers, which were clipped together. These were legal forms, stamped by the state of New York. I read the heading, Final Decree of Adoption. My eyes scanned the document, my mind struggling to process the words. It stated that a baby boy, formerly known as infant boy Doe, was legally and permanently adopted by a married couple, George and Beatrice Miller, my great-grandparents. A cold shock washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. I had to grip the edge of the desk to steady myself. My grandfather, Arthur Miller, the man my father worshipped as the source of his pure bloodline, had been adopted. He was not a Miller by blood at all. He had been a foundling, an orphan, a child chosen, not born into the family. With trembling fingers, I picked up the sealed envelope. I broke the seal and unfolded the thick, cream-colored pages within. The letter began. My dearest Gabby, it read, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found the secret I carried for nearly my entire life. I am sorry for the weight of it, but I could not leave this world without giving you the truth. The world you and I were born into can be cruel to those it deems different, and I see my son, your father, carrying on that cruelty with his foolish, painful obsession over blood. He worships a legacy he doesn't even truly possess. I was born in the heart of the Depression to a mother who could not keep me. I was left at a church, and from there I went to an orphanage. I was a few months old when the Millers, your great-grandparents, adopted me. They gave me a home, a name, a future. Your great-grandmother Beatrice was a saint, a woman whose love was as boundless as the sky. But George, my adoptive father, was a man much like Richard has become. He was proud and obsessed with lineage. He loved me, I think, in his own way. But I was always a disappointment to him. I was not of his blood. I could carry on his name, but not his line. I heard the whispers, the veiled comments, my entire life. He provided for me. He taught me his trade. But there was always a wall between us, a wall built of genetics. I spent my life feeling like I had to prove I was worthy of the name I was given. My vision blurred with tears as I continued to read. I was ashamed of it for so long. I hid it. I wanted to be a real Miller, just as George had wanted. When I had Richard, I hoped that my being a father myself would finally bridge that gap. But it only seemed to make him double down on the importance of the blood he thought we shared. He inherited the prejudice without ever knowing the truth of his own father. I never told him because at first I was afraid it would diminish his love for me. And later I didn't tell him because I knew he wouldn't understand. He would see it as a stain, a lie at the heart of our family. He would be ashamed of me, and so I kept my silence. But then you and Mark brought Lily into this world. When I held that beautiful child in my arms, I saw the same miracle that my mother Beatrice must have seen when she held me. And when I saw Richard and Eleanor treat her with such coldness, when I heard them speak of real grandchildren and bloodlines, it was like a knife in my own heart. They were wounding you and your precious daughter with the very same ignorance that had wounded me my entire life. I cannot let them use their twisted logic to harm you further. This information, Gabby, is a shield, or, if you need it to be, it is a sword. You decide how to use it. Please know this: my love for you and my love for your daughter, my great-granddaughter Lily, is the only real legacy I have ever cared about. It is not bound by blood, but forged in the heart. That is the only truth that matters. All my love, Granddad. I sank into his old leather chair, the letter clutched in my hand, and I sobbed. I cried for the little boy my grandfather had been, for the secret pain he had carried his whole life. And I cried with a profound, aching gratitude for this final, incredible gift. It was not just a shield, it was justice. The day of the inheritance hearing arrived with a cold, gray drizzle that matched the knot of dread in my stomach. Mark held my hand as we walked into the lawyer's office, the small, heavy mahogany box tucked securely in my briefcase. The room was exactly as I'd imagined, paneled in dark, imposing wood, smelling of old paper and furniture polish. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, were already there, seated on one side of a large conference table, looking stern and righteous. My sister, Clarissa, and her husband sat with them, Clarissa pointedly avoiding my gaze, her face a mask of nervous discomfort. She was a willing accomplice, benefiting from the injustice even if she wasn't the one actively orchestrating it. Mr. Peterson, the family lawyer, was a man in his late 60s with a kind but weary face. He had known our family for decades, and he looked as though he would rather be anywhere else. He nodded at us grimly as we took our seats opposite my family. The air was thick with unspoken hostility. After a few preliminary remarks, Mr. Peterson put on his reading glasses and began to read from my grandfather's will. Most of it was standard and straightforward. Personal effects, some specific bequests to old friends. But then he came to the core of the estate, the house, the savings, and the investments, which were bundled into something called the Arthur Miller Family Heritage Trust. The language of the trust was where the trouble lay. It stated that the assets were to be used for the welfare and advancement of my direct descendants. Before Mr. Peterson could even offer his own interpretation of the clause, my father cleared his throat and stood up, placing his hands on the table as if he were addressing a boardroom. "Mr. Peterson," he began, his voice booming with practiced authority. "I believe my father's intent here is abundantly clear to everyone in this room. He was a man who deeply valued family, tradition, and the continuity of our lineage. He gestured grandly, first toward my mother, then Clarissa. The term direct descendants has a clear and unambiguous biological meaning. It refers to the bloodline, the heritage that he, as a Miller, was so proud to be a part of. He let that hang in the air for a moment, his gaze sweeping over us, a king addressing his court. Clarissa's children, my grandchildren, Leo and Chloe, are the living embodiment of that continuity. They are the next generation of Millers, carrying his blood forward. He then turned his gaze to me, his expression shifting to one of condescending pity. Gabriella, while we all love her, made a different choice. A noble choice in its own way, but a choice that took her off the path of direct lineage. Her daughter, Lily, is a wonderful little girl, but she is not of our blood. She is not a Miller. Therefore, any portion of the estate designated for direct descendants or grandchildren's issue must, by the very definition of those terms, and by the clear intent of my father, pass to Clarissa and her children. It's not personal. It's simply a matter of preserving the legacy that Granddad Arthur worked his entire life to build. It's simple biology. My mother nodded in fervent agreement, adding, "Arthur was very clear with us about his wishes. He wanted the family's assets to stay within the family." The lie was so bald-faced, so completely contrary to the man I knew, that it almost took my breath away. They were twisting his memory into a grotesque caricature of their own prejudices. Clarissa shifted uncomfortably in her chair, staring down at her hands, but she said nothing. Her silence was her consent. She was willing to accept the fruits of this cruel argument, to see her own niece disinherited for the benefit of her children. Mark's hand tightened on mine under the table, his knuckles white. I could feel the rage radiating from him, but I gave his hand a slight calming squeeze. This was my fight. My father continued for several more minutes, pontificating about heritage, responsibility, and the sacred nature of blood. He built his case, brick by brick, a monument to his own arrogance and ignorance. He was so confident, so utterly convinced of his own righteousness. I let him finish. I let him lay out every piece of his hateful, fraudulent logic. I let him empty his arsenal until he finally sat down, looking smugly satisfied, as if the matter were now settled. The room was silent for a long moment. Mr. Peterson looked over his glasses at me, his expression unreadable. "Gabriella," he said, his voice quiet, "do you have a response to your father's interpretation?" I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the silence stretch. I could feel every eye in the room on me. My parents looked impatient, Clarissa looked miserable, and Mark looked at me with unwavering support. I rose to my feet slowly, my movements calm and measured. I did not feel rage. I felt a strange, crystalline clarity. "Yes, Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice steady, carrying easily in the quiet room. "I do." I looked directly at my father, then my mother. "I've listened to you talk. I've listened to you talk for years about blood, about lineage, about a direct line stretching back through the generations. You've made it the center of your universe. You've used it as a reason to treat my daughter as less than. You've used it as a weapon to hurt me. And now you are using it as the entire basis of your legal argument to disinherit my child." I paused, letting the words sink in. My father's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "You have built your entire identity, Dad, on being the son of Arthur Miller, the proud carrier of his name and his heritage. You've made your case, and I have to say, I find your logic compelling." A flicker of confusion crossed their faces. Clarissa looked up at me, her brow furrowed. "So compelling, in fact," I continued, my voice dropping slightly, "that I think we should apply it. Fairly, consistently, to everyone." With that, I reached into my briefcase and placed the old mahogany box on the polished surface of the conference table. The sound it made was soft, but it landed with the weight of an anvil. I opened the box and took out the folded, yellowed document. My hand was perfectly steady. "This," I announced, "was my grandfather's. I believe it clarifies his true feelings on the importance of bloodlines." I slid the paper across the table toward my father. He picked it up with a look of irritation, as if I were wasting his time with sentimental nonsense. He unfolded it. I watched his face as his eyes scanned the typewritten words. I saw the moment the meaning registered. The color drained from his face. His confident posture collapsed as if his strings had been cut. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He looked utterly, completely poleaxed. My mother, Eleanor, seeing his reaction, snatched the paper from his trembling hand. "Richard? What is it?" Her eyes flew across the page, and her gasp was sharp, audible. She looked from the paper to me, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. "What is this? This is some kind of sick joke." "It's not a joke," I said calmly. "It's a birth certificate, his original one." I then reached back into the box and retrieved the second set of documents. "And these," I said, sliding the adoption decree to follow the first, "are his legal adoption papers from 1934. The silence in the room was absolute, profound. It was so quiet I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Clarissa was staring, wide-eyed, at the documents her mother now held in a death grip. Mark was looking at my family with an expression of cold, hard pity. I turned my attention back to my father, who was still staring into space, completely stunned. "By your own logic, Dad," I said, my voice devoid of malice but sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "Your claim to the Miller family legacy is fraudulent. By your own argument, your father, Arthur, was not a real son. By your own definition, you have no more blood claim to this heritage, this name you're so proud of, than my daughter Lily does." I let the truth of that statement settle over them. The family tree you worship in your study, your branch is based on a lie you told yourselves because the truth was inconvenient. The only difference between my grandfather and my daughter is that Granddad was chosen out of love by his parents in a time of great hardship, just as Mark and I chose Lily. The love you claim to have, the love that is so conditional, so exclusive, it seems to be as fraudulent as your argument here today. I finally looked at my mother, whose face had crumpled into a mask of ugly rage. You wanted to preserve the family line? Granddad Arthur's real line started and ended with him. The rest is just a story you told yourselves, a story that just ended. I sat down, my part finished. The truth was on the table, and it was undeniable. The aftermath was chaos. My father, Richard, finally found his voice, but it was just a sputtering, incoherent stream of denials. It's impossible. It's not true. He kept reaching for the papers as if touching them again would change the words written there. My mother, on the other hand, had found her anger. "How could you?" she hissed at me across the table, her face pale and pinched. "How could you do this? Humiliate your father? Humiliate this family?" Clarissa finally broke. She started to cry, quiet, hiccuping sobs. "Is it true, Mom?" she whispered, looking at her parents with dawning horror. "All this time, you talked about blood and Grandpa." Mr. Peterson, to his credit, regained his professional composure quickly. He picked up the documents, his expression grave. The birth certificate and the adoption decree appeared to be authentic and legally binding state documents, he announced to the room. "In light of this new information, Richard, your argument regarding direct descendants based on a bloodline is, well, it's completely voided." He looked at me, a new, profound respect in his eyes. It would seem Arthur's intention was for descendants to be defined by love and legal recognition, not genetics, a definition under which your daughter, Lily, is unequivocally included. The legal case my parents had built so arrogantly had not just been defeated, it had been annihilated by their own logic. We left the office without another word to them. Mark and I walked out into the still drizzling rain and got into our car. The silence inside was heavy, but it was a different kind of silence than before. It wasn't tense. It was the quiet after a storm has passed, when the air is clean and calm. We drove for several blocks before Mark pulled over to the side of the road. He turned off the engine and just looked at me. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. And for the first time since I'd found that box, I let myself feel everything. A huge, shuddering sob escaped me, a mixture of grief for my grandfather's secret life, relief from the years of accumulated hurt, and the fierce, triumphant joy of vindication. I leaned my head against the window and cried, and Mark just put his arm around me and held me. He was so brave, I finally managed to say, wiping my tears. All his life he carried that, and he used it to protect us, to protect Lily. We talked about Granddad Arthur, about the quiet strength it must have taken to endure his own father's prejudice, to watch his own son perpetuate it, and to still be a man filled with such unconditional love. The inheritance, the money, and the trust, it felt completely irrelevant. The true inheritance was the truth he had given me. It was the key that had finally unlocked me from the prison of my family's judgment. By the time we got home, my phone was buzzing incessantly. A string of missed calls from my father. A long, rambling voicemail where he sounded both furious and pathetic, talking about misunderstandings and how I had taken things out of context. Then a series of texts from my mother, each one more venomous than the last, culminating in a simple, brutal message. You have destroyed this family. But then there was a different message, a single text from Clarissa. Gabby, I am so sorry. I had no idea. I am so ashamed of myself for just sitting there. I'm just sorry. I read it, and then I did something I hadn't been able to do in years. I turned my phone off. I silenced their noise, their anger, their frantic attempts to control the narrative. None of it mattered. I walked into my house, and my beautiful, bright-eyed daughter came running toward me, her arms outstretched. "Mommy, you're home," she yelled, crashing into my legs. I swept her up into a hug, burying my face in her soft hair, breathing in the simple, sweet scent of her. This was real. This was my truth. This was my legacy. Mark came and wrapped his arms around both of us. That night, we ordered pizza, piled onto the couch with blankets, and watched a silly, animated movie. It was the most normal, most wonderfully mundane evening. The war was over, and I was finally, truly home. A week later, after a tense series of phone calls mediated by Mark, I agreed to meet them. Not at their house, not at mine, but on neutral ground, a quiet corner of a busy coffee shop. They were already there when I arrived. They looked smaller, diminished. My father's usual blustering confidence was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out weariness. My mother's face was etched with lines of anger and resentment. Clarissa sat beside them, her eyes red-rimmed and full of shame. They tried to apologize. It was a clumsy, self-serving mess. My father talked about the shock of the revelation, as if he were the primary victim. My mother insisted they had always loved me, and that I had misinterpreted their concerns about Lily. "We just want to fix this," my father said, his voice pleading. "We want to be a family again." I let them finish, then I took a sip of my coffee. "You don't get to break something and then decide when and how it gets fixed," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "For 7 years, you have shown me exactly who you are and what you value. You have consistently and deliberately excluded my child. You made her feel less than. You tried to steal her inheritance based on an ideology that you, yourselves, were a living refutation of. The trust isn't just broken, it's been pulverized." I looked at each of them. My priority, now and always, is my daughter, Lily. It's protecting her from the judgment you subjected her to. If we are ever to have a relationship again, it will be on my terms. And the first non-negotiable term is this: Lily is my daughter, she is your granddaughter, she is your niece. There are no tears, there is no difference, there is no asterisk beside her name. You either accept that, completely and without reservation, or we have nothing more to talk about. They stared at me, speechless. The old Gabriella, the one who would have cried and pleaded for their approval, was gone. In her place was a mother who would burn the world down to protect her child. In the end, the legal interpretation of the will stood. The Family Heritage Trust was to be divided equally among my grandfather's grandchildren, me and Clarissa, with our children as the subsequent beneficiaries. I took my portion, a significant sum that could have changed my life in many ways, and I knew immediately what I had to do. I didn't buy a bigger house or a fancier car. Instead, I worked with a team of lawyers and financial advisors to create a new foundation. We called it the Arthur Grant. I used Grant instead of Miller because it was his secret, his truth, and I wanted to honor it. The Arthur Grant Foundation was established to provide financial aid and support services for adoptive families and for children aging out of the foster care system. It was the only legacy that made sense. Granddad Arthur's life wasn't about a name on a family tree. It was about the power of being chosen, of being given a chance. Now his legacy would be to provide that same chance for countless others. It was a legacy of love, not blood. A legacy of action, not ancestry. It was the perfect tribute to the quiet, brave man who had understood the true meaning of family all along. Several years have passed now. Lily is a happy, confident, and incredibly kind preteen who is passionate about art, just like her mom, and has a wicked sense of humor, just like her dad. Our life is peaceful, full of the ordinary, beautiful moments that make up a happy family. The relationship with my parents never fully recovered, but it has settled into a new, distant kind of civility. They send Lily birthday and Christmas gifts, thoughtful ones now. They call her their granddaughter. They try, in their awkward, fumbling way, to be present. But the warmth, the intimacy, is gone. It's a relationship built on the scar tissue of past wounds. Clarissa, however, has been a surprise. The shock of that day in the lawyer's office seemed to wake her from a long slumber of privilege and passivity. She has made a genuine, sustained effort to repair our relationship. She is a wonderful, doting aunt to Lily, and she volunteers twice a month at the foundation, dedicating her time to the legacy of the grandfather she realized she barely knew. Our family has been redefined. It's not the one on my father's ridiculous gilded chart. It is me, Mark, and Lily at the center. It's Clarissa and her family, slowly, carefully rejoining the circle. It's our chosen family of friends. And it's the quiet, enduring presence of Granddad Arthur, a man whose secret act of love reached across decades to give his great-granddaughter the justice and acceptance she always deserved. In the end, my parents were obsessed with the carefully pruned branches of a family tree, but they forgot that some of the strongest and most fruitful trees in the world grow from grafted roots. They were so focused on the past, on a history that was itself a fiction, that they nearly missed the beautiful, vibrant future growing right in front of them. I learned that family isn't something you inherit. It's something you build. It's built with love, with respect, with trust, and with the courage to stand up for those you love, even if it means standing up to the people you were taught to obey. My daughter is my legacy. The love in our home is our heritage. It needs no other justification. I truly hope my story can offer some strength to anyone out there who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong, especially by the people who were supposed to love you most. Have you ever had to redefine what family means to you? I would be honored if you would share your own stories and experiences in the comments below. This is a community for survivors, and your stories matter. Please don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of finding your power. Thank you so much for joining me and for listening to my journey. Remember that you get to define your own worth, and you get to choose the people who deserve a place in your heart.